I think it is fair to say that nobody in this House relishes the idea of a general election, because nobody wants to put the public to this inconvenience, particularly, as the gentleman says, this season. But across the country, there is a widespread view that this Parliament has run its course.
This is a Prime Minister who cannot be trusted. Having illegally prorogued Parliament for 5 weeks for his Queen's speech, he now abandons that Queen's speech. He got his deals through a second reading, then abandoned it. He promised us a budget on the 6th of November, and then he abandoned that too. He said that he would never ask for an extension, and he said he'd rather die in a ditch. Another broken promise. Mr. Speaker, every promise this Prime Minister makes, he abandons. He said he would take us out of the European Union by the 31st of October, do or die. He spent £100 million, Mr. Speaker, £100 million on an advertising campaign to leave on the 31st of October, but failed to deliver. And this is serious, Mr. Speaker. The National Audit Office says it failed to resonate. I ask the Prime Minister, I ask this House, with that £100 million, how many nurses could have been hired? How many parcels could have been funded at food banks? How many social care packages could have been funded for our elderly? He has failed because he has chosen to fail, and he now seeks to blame Parliament. £100 million of misspent public money. At the weekend, Mr. Speaker, we learned from the former Chancellor that his deal was offered to the former Prime Minister 18 months ago, and she rejected it as not good enough for the United Kingdom. So, we have a rejected and recycled deal that has been misrepresented by ministers in this House, no doubt inadvertently. The Prime Minister said in terms there would be no checks on goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. The Brexit Secretary himself has confirmed that there will be. The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister made promises to Labour members about workers' rights. I remember him with all the concentration he could muster, saying that workers' rights would be protected by him. The leak to the Financial Times on Saturday shows these promises simply cannot be trusted. He says the NHS, Mr. Speaker, he says the NHS is off the table for any trade deal. Yet, a majority of the British public don't trust him. And why should they? Why should they, Mr. Speaker? Thanks to a Channel 4 dispatches programme, this is actually quite an important point the Prime Minister might care to listen to. The Channel 4 dispatches programme has told us that we learn secret meetings have taken place between government officials of the UK government and representatives of US pharmaceutical firms, where the price of National Health Service drugs has been discussed. Mr. Speaker, we have a Prime Minister who will say anything, do anything to get his way. The reason I'm so cautious is quite simply I do not trust the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that I'm afraid that the Right Honourable General Leader of the Opposition is mistaken. As I always said, this government obeys the law. We comply with the law, and that has taken its course. Parliament asked for this delay. Now it's up to him to go to the country in a general election.
If he always obeys the law, why was he found guilty by the Supreme Court? And so, Mr. Speaker, we agree that an early election is necessary, but also seek good reason, since no general election has been held in December since 1923. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has a bill to deliver. He has a budget to present. He has a Queen's speech, which he himself told us was vital. He should, for once in his life, stick to his word and deliver. He says in his misogynistic way that people should man up. A bit rich for a Prime Minister who at every turn refuses to face up to his responsibilities and serially breaks his promises. When no deal is off the table, when the date for an election can be fixed in law, and when we can ensure students are not being disenfranchised, we will back an election so this country can get the government it needs. One that will end the underfunding of our public services. One will end the privatisation of our services. One that will tackle the grotesque poverty and inequality in our country created by this government and the government before it, and recognises the seriousness of the climate emergency, and one that will rebuild an economy that doesn't just work for the privileged few, as it all the Tory party knows about, but will build a society that ends inequality and injustice and really does give the next generation real hope and real opportunities of the kind of country and kind of world that they can live in.